Make it after all. They camped for 5 days, 50 miles from the summit, resting their oxen for the final push. The party started up the river again. On October 31st, the front axle of George Donner's family wagon broke. Cutting timber for a new one, George gashed his hand, and the family fell further behind. The rest of the party hurried on towards the summit.
We pushed on as fast as our failing cattle could haul our almost empty wagons. At last, we reached the foot of the main ridge near Truckee Lake. It was sundown. The weather was clear, but a large circle around the moon indicated an approaching storm. John Breen.
That night, they camped 1,000 feet beneath the dark granite summit, waiting anxiously for the Donner wagons to catch up, praying that the weather would hold. The Donners didn't come, and up on the summit, during the night, it began to snow. The next morning, the party made a frantic dash for the pass, but 5 feet had already fallen higher up, and the wagons began to slip on the steep, rocky ascent.
Despair drove many nearly frantic. The farther we went up, the deeper the snow got. The wagons could not go. The mules kept falling down in the snow head foremost, and the Indian said he could not find the road. The women were so tired carrying their children that they could not go over that night.
Stanton and one of the Indians made it as far as the summit, then turned back. The exhausted emigrants they were guiding could go no farther. As darkness came, they sat or lay huddled against the side of the mountain. The wind picked up, the temperature dropped, and the snow and sleet came lashing down.
We made a fire and got something to eat. Ma spread down a buffalo robe and sat up by the fire. The Indians knew we were doomed, and one of them wrapped his blanket about him and stood all night under a tree.
When they awoke next morning, the pass was completely blocked. They had come 2,500 miles in 7 months to lose their race with the weather by 1 day, only 150 miles from safety at Sutter's Fort in California. They retraced their steps to the lake and started building a winter camp. Down by the lake and up on the dark summit above them, it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed.
November 6th, Sutter's Fort. All things remain quiet here. The weather is bad. I am fearful the snow is too deep for the last company of emigrants to cross the mountains. George McKinstry.
For weeks, the Americans at Sutter's Fort had waited anxiously for the Donner Party to come in. They were shocked when in late October, James Reed stumbled out of the mountains, more dead than alive. Desperate to save his family, Reed pressed John Sutter for horses and supplies and rushed back up into the mountains. 2 days out, it started to rain. Higher up, the rain turned to snow. 12 miles from the summit, Reed could go no further and turned back again to Sutter's Fort for help. This time, Sutter had none to give. Every able-bodied man in the valley had gone south to fight the Mexicans. The relief effort would have to wait. On November 20th, 1846, an Irish immigrant named Patrick Breen began to keep a diary.
Friday, November the 20th, 1846. Came to this place on the 31st of last month that it snowed. We went down to the pass. The snow so deep we were unable to find the road, then turned back to the shanty on the lake. We now have killed most of our cattle, having to stay here until next spring. It snowed during the space of 8 days, with little intermission.
The 81 members of the Donner Party, 25 men, 15 women, and 41 children, including 6 nursing infants, were now huddled miserably in 2 makeshift winter camps. The Breens and their 7 children took over an abandoned shack not far from Truckee Lake. Peggy Breen did what she could to calm the younger children. Louis Keysburg built a rough lean-to for his family against one side of the Breen shack. Nearby, the Eddies crowded into a hastily constructed log cabin with the Murphys, the Fosters, and the Pikes. A second drafty cabin housed the family of Franklin Graves at one end, and Margaret Reed and her 4 children at the other. 6 miles away, on Alder Creek, the 2 Donner families huddled in tents where the storm had caught them.
We had not the first thing to eat. We seldom thought of bread, for we had not any since I remember. Ma made arrangements for some cattle, and the cattle was so poor they could not get up when they laid down.
During breaks in the storm, they scanned the summit, hoping to see a relief party inching its way down. No one came. 2 more attempts to get over the pass ended in failure, the immigrants floundering in the 20-foot drifts. Thin and pale with hunger, 3-year-old Eliza Donner whiled away the short winter days.
After the first storm, a little sunbeam stole down the steps and made a bright spot upon our floor. I sat down under it, held it on my lap, passed my hand up and down in its brightness. I gathered up a piece of it in my apron and ran to my mother. Great was my surprise when I carefully opened the folds and found that I had nothing to show.
On Thanksgiving, it began snowing again.
Sunday, November the 29th. Still snowing, now about 3 feet deep. Killed my last oxen today. Monday, November the 30th. Snowing fast, about 4 or 5 feet deep. Looks as likely to continue as when it commenced. No living thing without wings can get about. December the 1st, Tuesday. Our cattle all killed, but 3 or 4 of them. The horses and Stanton's mules gone, supposed lost in the snow. No hopes of finding them alive.
They began to mix what little meat remained with anything they could chew and swallow. Boiled hides, charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves. On December 15th, one of the Reeds' hired men, Bayless Williams, died of malnutrition.